Good afternoon to all of you. I'm glad you could take a little time out of your busy schedules to come for this history talk. And today I'm going to be discussing, this presentation is going to provide a brief overview of Second Army history from its establishment in World War I to the present, including its relationship with U.S. Army Cyber Command. Next slide, please. Okay, the history of Second Army began in World War I as a fighting army in France. On October 10, 1918, Lieutenant General Robert L. Bullard, who had distinguished himself as an aggressive corps commander, became the commander of Second Army American Expeditionary Forces. Second Army was responsible for a portion of the St. Mihiel sector along the Lorraine front. Second Army was ordered to advance towards Metz in November. General Bullard subsequently launched vigorous attacks against the Germans on November 10th, 1918. The 7th, 28th, 33rd, and 92nd Divisions, then on the Second Army front, began the attacks. Encountering stubborn resistance, Second Army made a considerable advance, recovering a total of approximately 25 miles of French territory before the armistice terminated hostilities the next day, November 11th. During its first month of combat operations, 102 soldiers under Second Army earned the Distinguished Service Cross. After the armistice, Second Army occupied an area in Belgium and Luxembourg, remaining there until the end of March 1919, and was demobilized in France on April 15, 1919. Okay, so this is the first Second Army American Expeditionary Forces. As my narrative will show, there's going to be others. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the next one. The Army reconstituted Second Army in August 1932 and activated it in October 1933 with headquarters at Chicago, Illinois, as one of 4 field armies that would help mobilize forces in event of a national emergency. In December 1940, the headquarters moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and was designated as a training army, which conducted training in 24 states. Next slide, please. During World War II, Second Army trained 11 corps, 55 divisions, and 2,000 smaller units of all arms and services composed of almost 1 million men for employment in all theaters of operation. Now, remember that first army that was deactivated in World War I? That was a separate UIC, Unit Identification Code. In June 1944, the Army combined the lineage and honors of the disbanded Second Army American Expeditionary Forces with this new current Second Army, then in service, to preserve the history and traditions of Second Army. Next slide, please. Second Army continued its training role after World War II. In June 1946, Second Army moved its headquarters to Baltimore, Maryland, as one of 6 Continental Armies under Army Ground Forces. Second Army encompassed the 7 states of Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia, and also included the District of Columbia. In June 1947, Second Army headquarters moved to Fort George G. Meade, Maryland, depicted here on the right. And on January 1st, 1957, Second Army was redesignated Second United States Army as one of 6 of the Zone of Interior Armies of the United States. Second U.S. Army supported multi-purpose missions of command, operations, training, and provisions of administrative and logistical services to ensure the continued operational readiness of its assigned combat and support units in the active Army, Army Reserves, and National Guard. Next slide, please. At the height of the Cold War, Second U.S. Army helped mobilize forces for potential conflict. During the September 1961 Berlin crisis, Second U.S. Army mobilized 39 National Guard and Army Reserve units in the 7-state area and 8 Army Reserve units from other Army areas. During the October 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, Second U.S. Army deployed 41 units, which comprised more than 5,700 military personnel. Next slide, please. Now, reorganizations within the Army led Second U.S. Army to be inactivated twice from 1966 to 1995. On January 1st, 1966, 1st and 2nd U.S. Armies merged, resulting in the inactivation of 2nd U.S. Army. In October 1983, 2nd U.S. Army reactivated at Fort Gillem, Georgia, and assumed responsibility for reserve component matters in 7 states and 2 territories formerly belonging to 1st Army. In July 1995, 1st Army left Fort Meade and reorganized at Fort Gillem upon the inactivation of 2nd Army. So this plays a role in trying to understand what we're going to be talking about here a little bit later with some of the insignia and the like. Next slide, please, which I'm going to come to next. Now, in 1968, when 2nd U.S. Army was inactive, the Army established distinctive unit insignia for divisions and armies. 2nd U.S. Army had long used the unofficial motto, second to none. But since it was inactive at the time, that motto became officially associated with the 2nd Infantry Division DUI, which is depicted on the left. When 2nd U.S. Army reactivated in 1983 and was eligible for its own distinctive unit insignia, it got the motto tout prepare, or all prepared, for its DUI, which is depicted on the right. The fleur-de-lis and Lorraine Cross in the 2nd Army DUI commemorate 2nd Army's World War I campaign participation in Lorraine, France in 1918. The red and white horizontal division reflects the colors of the organization's shoulder sleeve insignia, a reversal of the flag pattern for armies. And we're going to come back to some of this a little later. Next slide, please. In the meantime, the establishment of U.S. Army Cyber Command on October 1st, 2010, earmarked the Army's entry into the new operational domain of cyberspace and perpetuated the lineage and honors of 2nd U.S. Army. Now, previous to this, the Army Chief of Staff, General George W. Casey, Jr., had ordered that all geographic Army service component commands be numbered armies. And although Army Cyber Command was not an ASCC, it was treated as such by the Army staff. Consequently, the Army redesignated the inactive Headquarters and Headquarters Company, 2nd U.S. Army, as U.S. Army Cyber Command, with its headquarters at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The Army-centered military history, the proponent for organizational history in the Army, agreed to use the naming convention established for geographic ASCCs in 2005, which would not have numbered Army designations in their official titles. That is, the designation would be U.S. Army Cyber Command, and the lineage of 2nd Army would be assigned to ARCYBER, but 2nd Army would not be part of the designation. Now, that change occurred in 2005, the naming conventions of armies. So today we have U.S. Army North or U.S. Army South, and they'll have the lineage and honors of a respective army, but it's no longer in the title. So furthermore, an exception to policy was required to allow this lineage and honors arrangement because Army Cyber was a Table of Distribution and Allowances unit, a TDA unit, and geographic ASCCs were Modified Table of Organization and Equipment units and were therefore automatically entitled to lineage, unlike TDA units. Next slide, please. Well, the original plans for establishing Army Cyber included a command and control arrangement to assign the U.S. Army Network Enterprise Technology Command, NETCOM, to it. But ongoing discussions over legal authorities precluded these plans. As a consequence of these discussions, in March of 2014, the Army activated a new unit designated 2nd Army that assigned NETCOM, formerly a direct reporting unit of the Chief Information Officer G6 from HQDA, Headquarters Department of the Army, which supported Army Cyber Command's mission. Now that is assigned to 2nd Army. The commander of Army Cyber Command became dual-hatted as the commander of 2nd Army, which became a direct reporting unit to the HQDA CIO G6 in order to optimize the Army's force structure in support of Army Cyber Command's mission. The NETCOM Commanding General also became the 2nd Army Deputy Commanding General. Now, 2nd Army at this time took back its lineage and honors from Army Cyber Command and no longer had any direct ties with Army Cyber Command. It also had no assigned staff, and the Army Cyber staff became the de facto 2nd Army staff. Next slide, please. Well, the Army Cyber colors. The Army Cyber colors changed due to the March 2014 General Orders, which reactivated 2nd Army. In the summer of 2010, the Institute of Heraldry approved blue colors, as seen on the left, for Army Cyber Command. Once the October 1st, 2010 General Orders that established Army Cyber were issued, then the colors changed to red and white, symbolizing 2nd Army's lineage and honors being assigned to Army Cyber. But in March 2014, the General Orders which reactivated 2nd Army took away its lineage and honors from Army Cyber and led to a return to the original blue colors. Next slide, please. Now, the Army Cyber Command distinctive unit insignia on the left was approved in 2011, after ARCYBER had an affiliation with 2nd Army. It drew in part on the design features from 2nd Army's DUI on the right, such as the red and white fleur-de-lis, red and white being the colors of a field army. Lieutenant General Rede Hernandez, the first ARCYBER Commanding General, wanted to use the slogan, second to none, for the distinctive unit insignia, but that was already used by the 2nd Infantry Division. Now keep in mind that 2nd Army had used that unofficial motto prior to 1968, but it was inactive at the time that the distinctive unit insignia was given out. So the Institute of Heraldry said, okay, I'll tell you what you can do. You can use a Latin translation of second to none for your distinctive unit insignia, secundum ad nominem. It's also worth noting that since March 2014, when 2nd Army cut its direct ties to Army Cyber and took back its lineage and honors, that the Army Cyber distinctive unit insignia most likely will need to be revised at some future time. Because if you were to go on to the official website of the Institute of Heraldry that explains that, it explains the distinctive unit insignia has lineage and honors ties to 2nd Army. Well, that no longer exists. That was cut as of March 2014. Next slide, please. Well, when Army Cyber was established in October 2010, the Army Center of Military History was very clear that Army Cyber would have the lineage and honors of 2nd U.S. Army, but could not use 2nd Army in its official title. Despite that condition, Army Cyber used a variety of incorrect nomenclature on its signs and stationery, which caused some confusion in the command until Lieutenant General Edward C. Cardone became the commanding general in September 2013 and brought an end to that practice. He also brought an end to the practice of using the slogan second to none in the command, which was the slogan of the 2nd ID, his former command. Now, if you turn your attention to the right-hand corner there, it shows you the correct nomenclature of 2nd Army and 2nd U.S. Army. So 2nd Army, 1918 to 1957. 2nd U.S. Army, 1957 to 2014. And then a completely new 2nd Army from 2014 to the present. That's a different UIC. If you take a look at some of the imagery I have up there, you'll see the original sign for the command up at Fort Meade. It says U.S. Army Cyber Command 2nd Army. That was never authorized. And then within the command, we'll in that briefing slide, you'll see second to none on the bottom there. It was used as a motto here within the command. And of course, that was used internally. And it says 2nd U.S. Army. Okay, that's fine. You can have that for the lineage and honors, but that's not part of the official title at that time. On the lower right, this is something that's an aberration that never existed. On the former website, it used to say Army Cyber Command, U.S. 2nd Army. There was never a designation in the U.S. Army called U.S. 2nd Army. That never even existed. So there was some confusion over some of the signages I indicated about the use of 2nd Army, with 2nd Army, 2nd U.S. Army, U.S. 2nd Army, and General Cardone came and he gave some quality control to that and got it straightened out. Next slide, please.
Mr. Kaplan, is Is there some difference between what Second Army was and what U.S. Second U.S. Army was, or is it just a naming convention?
Those are naming conventions, because U.S. Second Army picked up the lineage and honors from the previous Second Army. And if you recall, and when I pointed it out, during World War II, the Second Army that was instituted in the 1930s picked up the lineage and honors from the American Expeditionary Forces Second Army. So that part's all neatly packaged up. It was simply that in March of 2014, the Army went to a naming convention of Second Army for what we are today, not Second U.S. Army. And that's where things separate. That's where things separate. It's because the other armies for U.S. Army North or U.S. Army South that have their lineage and honors links, they're still U.S. armies on their titles, if you follow me. So anyway, just as...
Still third?
Excuse me?
Third U.S. Army? Like
That's right.
Would be
That's right.
linked to Third U.S. Army, but ARCYBER is just linked to Second Army.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So it's confusing. It's confusing people because of the different naming conventions. The quality controlling of the naming conventions controlled by the U.S. Army Center of Military History. There was an exception of policy made in March of 2014. And so part of the exception of policy, I think I pointed out, is the Army Center of Military History non-concurred with the naming convention of Second Army in March of 2014 for a number of reasons. And I have the memo here, which I can read, discuss with you after this event here. But one of the issues they had is the U.S. Army does not make TDA organizations into armies. They just don't do that. So I understand that Secretary of the Army McHugh, this is my understanding indirectly from interviewing some key participants, Secretary of the Army McHugh believed that since this is a new day and age of a new type of warfare, that it's legitimate and proper now to give Army Cyber Command this affiliation because this is a new type of warfighting. And we're looking forward instead of looking backward. And the Army Center of Military History, they're the guardians of the gates of keeping the traditions in place of what's been done up until now. So I think that's part of the rationale of why Army Cyber Command has something distinct to itself out of the rest of the Army's lexicon of naming designations for armies. And the Army Center of Military History also pointed something else out that is worth noting. And it's something that I took a little bit of time talking about here. When the command was originally stood up, and at the time Major General Hernandez, who was designated to be the new commander for Army Cyber Command, was advised by the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Casey, said, you're going to have an Army designation. Now, look, we're not all experts on nomenclatures and designations. He was going to have an Army designation. Geographic ASCCs, and the fact that the Air Force had an organization called 24th Air Force, and the Navy had something called 10th Fleet. So it was proper for the Army to have something along the same lines. Well, when the Center of Military History gave its opinion on this, there wasn't enough time in late September 2010 to go back and forth and have all of this rigmarole of staff work to see which way the Army was going to do this. The command had to be stood up on 1 October. The general orders was being written. Lieutenant General Huggins, the G357, sent a memo on the 27th of September over to the Center of Military History, said, we want to call this Army Cyber Command / Second Army. And there's no documentation on this in paper. This happened so quickly, all I had was some phone message documentation. And so the center gave their position. The Army staff was not in a position to do anything in the 3 days remaining, but to really concur. And so Army Cyber Command stood up, gets the lineage and honors of the inactive Second Army. And here in the command, of course, members of the staff start using the signage, and we had, again, some unsure nomenclature here about which term of Second Army we should use on some of our signs and stationery, and that created a little bit of confusion. It still does. So when it came time for the Army Center of Military History again to weigh in, their arguments hadn't changed. But what had changed is this. The distinctive unit insignia incorporated design features from Second Army's DUI. And General Hernandez was very proud that we had the lineage and honors here at Army Cyber Command that went back to Second Army, that we could go back to war fighters from World War I. So by stripping away the lineage and honors from Second Army from ARCYBER, it left ARCYBER just with a brand new organization. Now I'm going to read you what the Chief of Military History recommended to the staff at the time as one of his observations. He gave a number of reasons. Again, a TDA organization shouldn't be an Army, and several other things. And he says, and this was in November 2013, in light of the above, CMH considers HQ U.S. Army Cyber Command to be the more appropriate location for the Second Army lineage. Recommend designating the new unit as the U.S. Army Cyber Operations and Integrations Command or some other TDA type designation, and allowing Headquarters U.S. Army Cyber Command to retain the lineage of Second Army, a lineage more in keeping with its scope and mission. Of course, that didn't happen. So that's, for me as the historian, pointing out some of the symbiology here with the patches and the flags. These were unintended consequences, I believe, that really weren't looked at too much in advance. So after March of 2014, I had already put a history exhibit up for General Hernandez. I had the original colors framed. They're outside the Commanding General's office, and all of a sudden now we need them back again. And the red and white colors are going to be, those are the things that are going to end up in history frames. So in any event, that's my brief overview of kind of how we got to where we are on Second Army, and now we should have more discussion. If there are any more comments or questions.
Yeah, Larry, what if all the other numbered armies are out there, they're being called U.S. armies, why, when they brought it back, back in 2014, why didn't they call us second
I don't know. I'm still researching this, quite frankly, and I don't have a lot of documentation on everything. I've got some pretty good documentation from some folks in the Army staff, but I don't know. I just don't know. I don't have an answer for that at this time, but I will have one in the future. And here's something that came up last time when I was discussing the establishment of Army Cyber Command, and we were talking about how Second Army was used as the vehicle for command and control over NETCOM, as it is today. The original use of Second Army had nothing to do with command and control. It was just a title to help identify this organization. And there was a belief, as my understanding goes, that we want to try to get this designation into the official title. And even though the Chief of Military History was saying, look, don't go that way. Keep the lineage and honors with ARCYBER where it is, because if you pull it away, ARCYBER's going to lose the lineage and honors of Second Army. And so my understanding in talking with several people and interviewing them is they believe that this is what General Hernandez's goal was, not just simply to have this elevated so you could use it in the title. And members of the Army staff, this was a way to do that. And then for those of you who were here after March of 2014, and we took a little bit of time to figure out, well, what's the proper naming convention for putting this on the letterhead and the like? What should it be? And we were told by the Center of Military History, you cannot use a slash mark because that indicates one UIC. These are two completely different UICs. And so we got very clear guidance from the Army Center of Military History on the proper naming convention. But this is distinct to Army Cyber Command, again, because it's Second Army, it's not a Second U.S. Army, which is out of the mode of the other naming conventions. And I don't have an answer for you, as I said at that time, of why they did away with the U.S. part. But it is a completely new UIC from the old Second U.S. Army.
Kaplan, so isn't there more to it than just the lineage honors? Doesn't the commander gain authorities or responsibilities with the Second Army title?
Oh, well, now we keep in mind that it could have been called something else. It was the command and control vehicle to have a NETCOM report up to. And again, the chief of military history was saying you can call it something else and achieve the same goal. But there was a belief in the command that we want to get to be able to use the term Second Army out in the open. Well, a belief by some. I mean, this was the Army staff that did this, and we were supporting them, but it was a belief by some. And I haven't tracked down to the people that I've talked with, well, why this and why not that? I mean, it really wasn't that important. It was the idea that this was a vehicle, we're going to use this. The importance to me as the historian is, well, do you understand that if you do this, you're going to have to change your colors, and you're most likely going to have to change your distinctive unit insignia. But I'm probably the only person here in the command that really is concerned about that.
So with that said, what is our, do we have an approved DUIC for our uniforms? And
Yeah.
do we have an official Second Army motto?
Yes. Second Army, in its own right, has its own distinctive unit insignia. I showed it earlier. And they've got their own flag, their own set of colors, which I know our chief of protocol is going to order for the commanding general. And Second Army will be entitled to one campaign streamer from Lorraine. And so all of that all of that, there's no mystery to that. As I was saying, the proverbial rub is the changing the distinctive unit insignia to align with ARCYBER's current mission, since it doesn't have any affiliation officially with Second Army, other than the fact that the commander of ARCYBER Command happens to be the commander of Second Army. And I have a copy of the paperwork back in my office. There are two people who were assigned to Second Army, the commanding general of ARCYBER Command and the commander of NETCOM, and that there's nobody assigned to it as far as people go. And so that's why I said the ARCYBER Command staff is the de facto Second Army staff for the foreseeable future, because General Cardone simply just needed a vehicle to have command and control over NETCOM. And that's what's been achieved by this.
And the Latin version of Second to None is the official Second Army motto then, as of today?
No. That's the ARCYBER motto. Okay, Second Army is tout prepare, all prepared. That hasn't changed since 1983. If the Second Army had not been inactivated in 1968, it most likely would have gotten the Second to None motto on its distinctive unit insignia because it's an army and it would have had more precedence over a division. But since it was inactivated at the time, that's one of those sidebars of history.
Given that ARCYBER's, a two-person army,
Second Army.
A two-man show.
is there any historical precedent where the Army has reactivated an army and never actually manned it?
I don't have enough expertise about that, but what I can say is this. In the summer of 2010, when the Army Center of Military History was offering some armies to think about associating with ARCYBER Command, one of the armies that some of the staff officers here, or were going to be assigned here, believed would be really appropriate was the 15th Army from World War II, General Patton's Paper Army, because it was a stealth army. There was nobody really assigned to it. And General Hernandez didn't think that was the best approach. He liked the idea of real war fighters, and Second Army was his choice of the number of the armies that were given to choose from the Center of Military History. But I don't know offhand of any other example.
So, going back to the flag or the colors. So in the future, it would be appropriate for the display of colors, U.S. Army, Second Army, and then Army Cyber? Is that right? Oh,
Well, for the commander. For the commander.
yeah, for the command. So anytime we would put up a flag display, that would be the setup. Is what,
If General Cardone or his successor is as the commander. But keep in mind that it's just the people that are entitled to that colors, there's only 2 people.
oh, okay, all right. So, I see your point. So in other words, that flag display I just described could be set up in his office, but nowhere else.
That's right.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, makes sense. Makes sense.
Or it's changed command.
Well, okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
that commander would be swapped to.
Yeah, for the Army Cyber Commander and the NetCom Commander are the only 2 people that are authorized those colors.
Now, for everyone to know, on the NetCom side of the house, when this all came about and the whole de facto ARCYBER being the Second Army staff, there were times that, 'cause that's where I retired at, it was NetCom on the staff, that we weren't getting traction fast enough due to lack of personnel here in ARCYBER, that we had to ask the question, okay, can we publish something as subordinates because General Morrison is the deputy commander, or is that not proper? So the discussions took place at NetCom as a more established staff at the time, trying to figure out, can we get orders and stuff done a little bit faster in place of Second Army not having a staff, so that's just FYI.
Dr. Kaplan, with all the discussions and all the staffing we're doing right now in regarding to actually elevating the command into an ASCC, is there any considerations that have to be done from a historical or lineage point of view? Or is that because it was already done because they treated us like an ASCC?
I think that's really the thing. That's a very good point. I don't have an answer for why the Army staff gave us the treatment as an ASCC when we weren't. Because there was a great deal of confusion in the command in its early years that we were an ASCC. And we were never an ASCC. We were an ASCC-like organization. And so just to backtrack, when I talked about the establishment of Army Cyber Command last time in my talk, I just want to deal with that point for a minute. So Strategic Command is over U.S. Cyber Command. And Strategic Command can have one ASCC in the Army, which is Space and Missile Defense Command, Army Forces Strategic Command. You can't have 2 ASCCs to Strategic Command. You can only have one. So when SMDC RSTRAT was made the interim Army Cyber in 2009 and 2010, before Army Cyber Command was stood up, that's why it was made the interim Army Cyber, because it was the ASCC to US STRATCOM. And when or if US Cyber Command gets elevated up to a unified command, as we all know, then it would be appropriate to have Army Cyber Command be the ASCC to US Cyber Command. And so my belief is that the people on the Army staff who treated us like an ASCC organization did just that. There was no rationale otherwise to do that and to give us this Army designation. And that's where some of the confusion comes in again, because we got something that a geographic ASCC is entitled to, but we were not a geographic ASCC, if that makes any sense.
So if we become, or when we become an ASCC, doesn't that change our authorization document? Would we convert from a TDA document to an MTO document? And then the lineage and honors would be appropriate because of that?
I have to defer to the chief about that part. He'll know more about that than I will.
To be a mix, be a mixed organization again, but there is, Colonel McHenry and I were discussing, you know, some of the gift bag actions will likely impact, do we even need a second army at all? I mean, gift bag actions will probably, we'll be able to get rid of that, and there's no DRU requirements, so then ARCYBER would be the unit, and we would not be.
With the, yeah, lineage and honors, but not,
Yeah, but
not
not, and so those two people will be cut.
So, sir, then will we renegotiate where, if we're gonna have new established lineage and honors then?
Well,
Through this rigmarole?
I mean, it may go back to that. If you go back to the Chief of Military History's guidance, that's their business. I mean, they're the proponents for the organizational history of the U.S. Army, and there's a lot of complexities and nuances and all kind of things. They really know what they're talking about over there.
Do a drawdown. That's why colors move around as a drawdown, because the Department of Army History gets a vote.
That's right.
After Desert Storm, I was 3rd Armored Division, and for 2.5 weeks, I was 8th Infantry Division. Then I became 1st Armored Division again. I was 3rd Armored Division, 8th Infantry Division, then 1st Armored Division, all in about 3 months. We had patches and everything.
So
Retention, all the kids showed up, you know, and that quit because the Department of Army says no. The 1st Armored Division has precedence over 8th Infantry Division, so they will be the lasting division.
So as Colonel Rector is indicating, if things in the future change and there's no need for that second army, there's already historical precedent for assigning a second army lineage and honors to ARCYBER. And the Army can do whatever it wants. I mean, the Secretary of the Army can make exceptions to policy and do all kinds of things. But if ARCYBER at some future time does get back the second army lineage and honors, then they won't need to change their distinctive unit insignia.
So we have to determine whether or not the distinctive unit insignia is appropriate for the current mission that our.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Because right now it's overcome by events. I mean, right now it's just not. It's not really valid on what it says on the Institute of Heraldry website, because there are no ties. And for those of you that are well informed about this, the G1 of the Army is the presiding group that you have to go to change a distinctive unit insignia. And the Army regulations are very clear that once you get a distinctive unit insignia, you can't change it. But this is an exceptional situation, and so you could request an exception to policy to change it, and probably, I would imagine that would be favorably looked upon.
I think we'll have some clarity probably the next 6 months, and then from that time, the mark will be on the wall. This is the enduring herald, unit designation, and then we'll have 3.5 years to get our stuff together before we arrive at Fort Gordon. Yeah.
Just make sure the colors get there.
Because when we go there, all the history of ARCYBER and how the maturation of the unit itself, I mean, that'll be part of that new headquarters about, how we started. And
Absolutely.
there's a kind of a dynamic history from 2010 till we arrive in probably calendar year 2020.
Absolutely. But what's created, again, some confusion in the command, and I hope I haven't confused you all too much, is it's confusing following all of this. I mean, how the Second Army fits in here and how it fits in there, and then some of the signage, it's just downright confusing.
What's the issue with the use of numeral 2?
Okay, well that's, again, the Army Center Military History made it clear what we could do and what we couldn't do. So it's U.S. Army Cyber Command and AND Second Army, you write that out. That's what's authorized. Now if you want to abbreviate, you can have ARCYBER with an ampersand 2 capital A. That's it. No 2D, no 2ND, 2 capital A. And that's where some of the confusion comes in again, is because people are using some old naming conventions or what they think are old naming conventions, unintentionally trying to do the right thing, but it's just creating confusion.
Correct. Stuff, people still use it wrong.
We have seen memo from NETCOM that were written with the Second Army letterhead on it. No, you guys are NETCOM.
Yeah, what he mentioned
NETCOM
about
and Second
NETCOM,
Army?
so-
Recycling what we did when this was all coming about.
Yeah, there was right. There were staff overmatched with a historical precedence of NetCom, a large mature staff, and then very lean up here. So we put a lot of effort trying to get that right. And though, right now, if General Morrison, as the commander of NetCom, signs anything on behalf of Second Army as a DCG, it originates from his headquarters, goes down to his SCS to chief, and we present it to him. Their staff does not produce Second Army documents without it coming to me for approval, and I send it back to him. Yes, sir, go ahead and sign that, because you're right, it's confusing, and we just got to get things. We have the ability now to kind of keep things in the left and right limits, and that's the TTP that NetCom does not originate any Second Army documents whatsoever that come out of this command. If and is approved by myself, and it goes back down.
And so, as the chief is talking about it, the chief has lived through this. There's been a lot of confusion. There's just been a lot of confusion. So we've done our best to try to straighten things out, and I think for the most part, things are pretty well straightened out now. It's just making sure that people that are in the legacy organization are all on board with what the modern nomenclature and
One of the things for the MilCon is we're at the 90. We're going to go down for the 100% design the 7th of March. And I've told the contractor in the bid, there's going to be a sign there. And I'm not telling you what's going to be on that sign, but there's going to be a sign there. It's marble, and it says "to be determined." Because the design, they want to know exactly what I said. We're not in a position to do that. So it's going to be ARCYBER, it's going to be Second Army, it's going to be maybe something else, and we will tell you within the last 90 days of the construction being complete. I'll tell you what to put on that sign. But right now, it's just a sign, a blank slate, and we will tell you. Yeah.
So dare I ask, so where does Joint Force Headquarters Cyber fall into all this?
well, that's part of Army Cyber Command.
Directed by the Army Cybercom for each ASCC, each service to develop a Joint Force Headquarters Cyber. The Army chose to design ours separate, different from the other services, but the directive, that's a task from Cyber Command, not the Army, to stand it up.
So
it's the joint.
So I'm tracking, they are part of our cyber.
Oh, yes.
And Second Army, just our cyber, right? Okay.
And again, going back to the establishment of what some people envisioned, in 2010, when General Casey gave the approval to establish Army Cyber Command, he gave the approval in February 2010, and the plan at that time in his office was all of NetCom would be assigned to Army Cyber Command. And then later in the summer, when Major General, later to be Lieutenant General Hernandez, was going to be the commander, he's told that he can have an Army designation. Now, General Hernandez and many other people on the Army staff, or even myself as a historian, you don't know the nuances of these naming conventions. So who knew they changed in 2005? But they did. So what General Casey envisioned was Army Cyber Command, and you can say maybe / Second Army, all of NetCom assigned, and there you go. You've got to get, you wouldn't have needed this separate command and control arrangement that had in 2014 if NetCom had been assigned in 2010. If you see what I'm saying.
So General Cardona is the commander of Second Army, commander of ARCYBER, and the commander of Joint Force Headquarters Cyber. General Gibson is not the commander of anything. He's a director of that on behalf of General Cardona, but he is the commander and has 3 hats. And he has certain authorities as a joint commander as well that the other Army commanders don't have, on the SIGINT authorities and things like that he could exercise on behalf of Admiral Rogers.
So what is General Morrison's, Gibson's correct title? Director, Joint
Director of Joint Force Headquarters Cyber.
Which, if you didn't get a chance to attend the authorities briefing, once we get it reviewed, we're posted on the SIPR side, we did record it. So you would be able to view it and see those different legalities on the authorities, or which hat that he's wearing as well.
But General Cardona, by his authority as a general officer, he has delegated some authorities in general officer lanes to General Gibson to act on his behalf as a de facto commander. She has some authorities to do that's transferable from a lieutenant general down to a 1-star, which he's allowed. He's try to give her all the authorities that make sense as in her position to. But people often identify her as a commander, which is, no one says anything, but in legal speak, General Cardona is the commander.
Back to your question about the three commands, they all have different originators. The genesis for the development of Army Cyber and Nav Cyber and Mar Cyber, it goes back to 2009 when SecDef said, stand up Cybercom and all the services will provide a component to it. So that led, as Dr. Kaplan said, to General Casey in February of 2010 agreeing to an R4 Cyber at that time, which later in the general order in October of 2010 created Army Cyber Command. So SecDef is the originator of Army Cyber Command, but U.S. Cyber Command is the originator of JFHQ Cyber, and HQDA is the originator of Second Army. So they all have three parents that are kind of distant cousins and, married to first cousins and all that stuff.
So you're saying we're just an incestuous lot?
No, I think a lot of the work that the G5 works on now, I mean, we will get closure and some, clear lines of authority, and we'll get this kind of wrapped up hopefully the next 5 to 6 months, and it will kind of get everything worked
We
out.
say that every 5 or 6
Yeah, we just saying
months.
that.
That used to be the joke of the general order. When's it coming? 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
But there's been some some battles have been won already. We haven't finished the war part of it, but some near-term battles and skirmishes have been done, and then we are in the final throes of completing this, which will probably give us all clarity about where we stand.
So if you would call over to the Army Center Military History, which I've done, and ask for a statement of service for Second Army, you'll see on Second Army's history statement of service from World War I to the present, there's a line in there that they're U.S. Army Cyber Command, right in the middle of Second Army's history. U.S. Army Cyber Command owned that for a little bit.
So we're down to the last 10 minutes. If there's no other questions or no further discussion, we'll conclude the discussion. We do have a survey we'd like to pass out if you